Don't you love the light? We're going to do good morning. That means everybody can stand. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. First of all, I know we're so incredibly excited that you're here and in person, and we know how important that is for cultivating relationships, so thank you so much for being here and for being part of this on behalf of the New Caller Network, Sarah, and everyone who's going to be participating this morning. Really, again, we're just so incredibly happy that you're here. My name is Rebecca Estrada, and I serve as the Specialist for Higher Education and Workforce Development with Los Alamos National Laboratory here, and I'm just incredibly honored to be able to open today's proceedings. Obviously, we are in a time where we know that workforce challenges are huge, and innovation and all the different ways we can think about it, putting all the collective knowledge of everyone in this room and in other places together to make sure that we're meeting that need and that we're not leaving anybody behind, and that we know that the future is different. What work looked like even 5 years ago is not what work is going to look like 5 years from now. So again, we're grateful that you're here to have this dialogue with us and to hear from our experts. So I'm going to go ahead and actually let them begin to tell you about themselves mostly and kick off today's proceedings. But let me just do a quick introduction. Alex Greenberg is from the New Mexico Department of Economic Development. Raina Sapansky is our Chief of Staff for the New Mexico Speaker of the House. And Mia, I'm sorry, Mia, I don't think I can read. Peterson, is the new Executive Director for the New Mexico Tech Council. So obviously, sorry, this was all very impromptu, so I apologize. But let me now let you hear from the experts. I will stop talking other than to say thank you so much again for being here. My last small quick plug will be, Los Alamos National Laboratory is on track to hire 1,800 people this year. We hired about 1,200 last year, and that's just going to keep going. So obviously, all of us together will be able to meet regional need because it's so incredibly important. So thank you so much for being here and helping frame this conversation. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. As she said, my name is Alex Greenberg. I'm the Director of the Science and Technology Office for the state's Economic Development Department. You will hear a lot today around the possibilities for new-collar work and the wide range of industries that will demand dynamic 21st century skill sets. A skilled and robust workforce and talent pipeline is a foundational cornerstone of economic development. Technology companies and businesses generally were already struggling with skill scarcity challenges even prior to the pandemic. Now there's a convergence of factors and trends leading to the greatest labor market disruption since World War II. These include macroeconomic trends, the trends of digitization, disruption, along with the pandemic, obviously. This has led to millions of resignations, which along with declining in immigration, has further exhausted our skill scarcity challenges. Further, it's not just the entry-level positions. The skill shortages extend to the C-suite, where we need more managerial and financial expertise to create successful technology companies and onboard new workers from diverse backgrounds into organizations and then support and retain them once they're there. To combat these challenges, we need to design systems and engage with creative solutions along multiple dimensions to meet the challenges we face in an intentional and thoughtful way. There are 5 core challenges identified by NMEDD's 20-year statewide plan that all have a workforce component. The 5 main challenges are, number 1, difficulty in attracting and retaining talent in urban, rural, and tribal communities. We need to focus on retention and upskilling with the employees that we do have. We need to systematically address and reduce burnout, which means we need to double down on employee health and wellness, build 21st century skills that focus on professional and personal development as we begin to understand the importance of a growth mindset. We also need to reimagine the talent pool, recruiting from the sectors that were the hardest hit by the pandemic, like the hospitality and service sectors, and whose workers often have the key interpersonal and team skills to draw upon that are often lacking in the research and laboratory environments. Number 2 is the misalignment between higher education and industry. We need to reduce the mismatch between employee-required skills and skills obtained at New Mexico's colleges and universities, and give students the best chance at high-paying careers here in New Mexico. I think a great example of this is the additive manufacturing program and many of the initiatives that New Collar is working with. And that's also why the K through 12 initiatives are so mission critical. Studies show that the earlier students are introduced to STEM and entrepreneurship, the better the long-term outcomes. Number 3 is the disengagement of socially economically disadvantaged communities in the planning process. Traditional models of economic development have led to many communities being disengaged from the development planning process. This is why DEI initiatives are so important and why the NMEDD is starting the JEDI office, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we'll also have 2 full-time staff to begin. We need to be able to support these initiatives, the new tools and programs as they become available. Number 4 is the public sector dominance in New Mexico's innovation ecosystem. Separating New Mexico's private sector from the federal government is necessary to support the emergence of dynamic businesses and a highly skilled workforce in New Mexico. Supporting new programs focused on building technical capabilities and funding accessibility are critical to the future of a strong private sector. Number 5 is the concentration of the economy in just a few key sectors. Enabling new industries like recreational cannabis and supporting high-growth industries like film and television through the newly announced $40 million Next Gen Film Academy and UNM Anderson School of Business's MBA concentration in film and digital arts are the kind of steps New Mexico needs to continue to take. We also need to use the workforce development best practices to enhance industries like cybersecurity, aerospace, additive manufacturing, and biosciences. In conclusion, in terms of workforce, we need to create systems to facilitate the development of new skills, as well as do a better job of creating work environments that actually support workers. Psychological safety is a key performance indicator in that regard. A sense of belonging and feeling valued holds the key to strengthening ties with employees so they want to grow with the company rather than without it. Obviously, the prism through which we approach these topics is with a particular emphasis on improving worker productivity. But health and financial security both have been linked to improved work performance, so how we approach worker productivity is of critical importance. Thank you so much.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Once again, my name is Mia Peterson. I am the Executive Director for the New Mexico Tech Council. And I'm honored to speak today and be able to participate in the summit. Workforce development is not only a pillar of the New Mexico Tech Council, but also a personal passion of mine. The work we're doing today is critical for our local economy and for our workforce of tomorrow. And this is no news to y'all. We're experiencing an unprecedented labor market, like nothing we've ever seen before. Employers are struggling to connect with talent. On the other end, workers are really holding out for roles that are meaningful and will offer a lot of growth opportunity. In my former role, I oversaw talent acquisition and employee performance. And what I noticed over the years is that the employees that we hired from New Collar programs, they not only were better prepared for their entry into the tech workforce, but they actually accelerated more quickly through the organization. And I really attribute this to the type of training they would receive in these non-traditional workforce development programs. And I got my friends from Deep Dive. Of course, I have to give you all a shout out because I partnered very closely with Deep Dive for years, and I saw the students really come in with the soft skills and the ability to problem solve and work on a team that helped them to hit the ground running and do things very quickly. And as the chair for the Tech Hire New Mexico Advisory Committee, I realized that in order for these workforce development programs to be successful, it really takes everybody in the community. We have to link together, and we have to kind of connect the dots to make that full circle. And so what I mean by that is, our educational partners, they have to know what skills our employers are looking for. And in turn, our employers have to be connected to the students in these programs so that they're hiring them, and we have that track record. And let's not forget about our students, right? They need mentorship. They need access to funding. in order to kickstart their careers. And as a native New Mexican, as somebody who left after college, trying to find that job, what really excites me about the New Color movement is that it offers New Mexicans a path to a better future. It's turning jobs into careers, and that is creating our sustainable pipeline. And as the executive director of the New Mexico Tech Council, I plan to make New Color development a priority by working closely with our members and our community partners, with y'all here today in the room, to really make sure that we're contributing our resources to help launch those ideas into actions, right? We got a lot of smart people here. I think we can figure out this problem. But it's going to take a little bit of working together. I will leave you with a quote by the cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to the summit, and I want to thank Sarah and Greg Burns for their leadership in this event. And on behalf of the New Mexico House of Representatives, I want to thank you for bringing together such a wonderful group of people to help New Mexicans get ready for a new economy and to be part of a rapidly growing segment of the workforce that is sure to be in high demand. I was recently at a rummage sale fundraiser for my son's school. He's 12, and we walked together toward this table that was labeled technology. Now, he immediately gravitated towards the side of the table that had iPhone chargers and Bluetooth speakers, and then he looked at the other side and he said, "Mom, what is all this?" He was pointing at basically what was a technology graveyard, or what I told him was a blast from my past. The first mysterious objects were overhead projectors. Do you remember those? Then we moved on to a boombox, a Walkman, even more mysterious, a VCR, and then finally, the most puzzling of all, a fax machine. And he asked, "Why would you need that, Mom? You could just send an email." Now, I share this story not just to wake you up and give you a little chuckle, but I also want to remind us how quickly things change. Today, you're going to have a chance to gather with thought leaders from across sectors, and I ask you to set aside your notions of what's possible and what is impossible. Things change so quickly. Too often in New Mexico, we get stuck in believing that we can't be the leader, that we can't change, and I believe we can. Our people are resilient, they are courageous, they are creative, and they are brilliant. It's just that for too long, we haven't allowed ourselves the tools and the aggressive vision that we need to catapult ourselves forward. And that's why this summit is so important, to launch what I hope will be a statewide, coordinated effort for workforce development for the modern age. And I hope you'll think big and bold. We need that. The legislature has made sustained, game-changing investments into K-12 education since 2019. And now it's time to leverage those investments into real partnerships for the workforce that we need, and expand those investments into targeted educational initiatives. I also share my story of the technology graveyard to ask you to consider the sustainability of our footprint as we move into this new world of 3D technology and all of the other technologies that we can't even anticipate now. Could New Mexico be a leader in the development of sustainable technology practices? And I bet the people in this room can answer that question. Over the next 2 decades, our economy is sure to shift, and we can't predict some of that shift because technology is evolving so rapidly. However, we know that our energy sector, both in oil and gas and in renewables, is producing workers that we want to keep in New Mexico. And we want those workers' children to stay in New Mexico. To accomplish that, as our energy sector evolves, we'll take comprehensive workforce planning, training, apprenticeships, and collaboration. So I'm really looking forward to the summit. I'm looking forward to listening and learning this afternoon. And I think you are in for a fantastic day. So welcome and have a great day.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out today. Our first summit was in 2019. I attend a lot of conferences, and what happens is we learn fabulous things and we have our minds blown by all kinds of great ideas, and then we go home and nothing happens. And I wanted something that was going to be quite different. I wanted something where we would ideate solutions to the problems that we talk about all the time and start a dialogue between our educators, our students, our employers. And so I think the afternoon is going to be a lot of fun, but what I really want is for us to come away with some new relationships so that we can work on changing the landscape, that we can look at meeting different people and trying new ideas. And unfortunately, in 2019, our meeting was in November, and we all know what happened after that. So we're starting over. And I hope that you all come away with some great ideas, but that you're also able to integrate this into real actions moving forward. So we'll work on that this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, my work, new color is not a term that I invented, sadly. It is a term that was coined by Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM. And Ginny, when Mr. Trump was elected, wrote an open letter that was published in quite a lot of newspapers. And she said, Mr. Trump, and I'm paraphrasing here, but she said, Mr. Trump, we're just thrilled you want to bring back manufacturing, but we don't want those old jobs. We don't want coal miner jobs or steel worker jobs. We want new collar jobs. And I thought, new collar embodies what we do. The kinds of skills that I need in my lab are the kinds of skills that used to be blue-collar jobs but are now digital. And if you want to run a welding machine, you have to understand CAD. If you want to run a welding machine, you also have to understand metrology. And so it's a very different landscape, and I think that Jenny just hit the nail on the head, and I think she is starting this whole trend of people thinking very differently about our workforce and our training. I wanted to start today by having a little chat with my really good friend, Jeff Fullerton. And Jeff, can you come up? I lost him.
We don't have to be 6 feet apart anymore, Sarah.
No, this is true. Are they on?
Yeah, they're on. Great. Thank you.
So a lot of my ideas were really shaped when I met Jeff. And my
That's
ideas...
never a good sign for any good idea.
And so I've been in Santa Fe part-time for 30 years, and when I moved full-time, I joined the Makerspace. And there was this high school student who fixed all the machines, always helped me when I was stuck, and it was Jeff. And one day, Jeff calls me or emails, and probably email, because, yeah, or text, and says, Sarah, I need to take you to lunch. And I thought, oh, okay. And he said, your time is valuable, and I know you have to eat. So I'm going to take you to lunch so I can get some help from you. And we sat down to talk and tell the story of what happened.
I think it's important to think about the moment of time that is too, right? You have such a changing landscape and one that really democratized, right? You are at a point where you have cell phones and 3D printers and the price points of all of those things dropping so dramatically and the landscape changing so quickly that when I was looking at what my next steps looked like and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. Did I want to go and pursue higher education? Did I want to try and start my own venture? I really found myself struggling with a basic cost-benefit analysis of going and spending $200,000+ on a degree and 4 years of my life in a manner that I didn't really see benefiting me in the long run. I felt that I was going to be able to kind of figure things out, like Sarah alluded to, with the 3D printers and the technologies. And what I had to think about was the value there. And someone who had been so integrated with kind of higher ed, but also looking outside of the box of higher ed and thinking about what do we do with jobs training? How do we have machines? How do we have skill sets that aren't tied to a degree and ones that can continue to grow with the individual? And I wanted to know if I was missing something, because from my perspective, and I felt like I wasn't seeing the value there, yet I was raised in a system that had placed the value on going and pursuing that higher ed degree. And so when talking to Sarah, that was the question that I asked, is like, what am I missing here? What does the future of education look like? And is this a worthwhile investment? Because ultimately that's what it is. It was an investment, similar to, buying a stock or, buying a house.
Yeah, and what I said is, what do you want to be? What do you want for a profession? And you answered an entrepreneur.
I really hate that phrase, though. I think that it's been so overrun by the kind of hashtag hustle community, and especially the crypto community. And it entails going against the grain, but it entails doing so in a manner that completely abandons the current system. And I don't know, I prefer the classic definition of the phrase entrepreneur, which is pursuing your own path and doing so in a manner that is sustainable, but it's also really hard. And I think that's, I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Vince later, and especially in this state, where you don't necessarily have the culture of entrepreneurship. And so when Sarah says that phrase, I don't mean it in the way that it's been kind of overrun in the last 3 years. I really do mean it in the kind of pioneering your own path sort of sense.
And I took it that way.
I'd hope so.
But I, said, I'd been a serial entrepreneur, and I said, yeah, you don't need to go to college. And I have an MBA from a good school. But I said, if you wanted to be a doctor or a brain surgeon, you got to go to college. I don't want a doctor who hasn't been to college. If you wanted to be a rocket scientist up at Los Alamos, you really have to go to college. But I didn't feel that being an entrepreneur warranted that if you had a good idea and if you had access to the skills that you needed. And then you told me the story about your software company.
So what Sarah's alluding to here is that there's kind of opportunity in front of us at every juncture, right? Ultimately, the opportunity that I pursued was going to work with Meow Wolf. But prior to that, I was a tech kid, right? I loved taking apart computers and putting things back together. And from that was able to stumble into a consulting company and ended up pursuing that path and had done so for about 3.5 years up to, kind of through that point. and learned so much in that environment. And it was because in that like rapidly changing digital evolution, curriculums and structures hadn't caught up. And for me, as like a digital native, someone who had grown up so comfortably with technology, these were problems and perspectives that I didn't even realize the rest of the world was facing. And it was native for me. Like I thought about problems in the manner of search engines and database structures, because that's what I was raised in. And so ultimately what I pursued was this kind of tech consulting work for high security locations, places that were struggling with deployment of mobile computing and new devices, but couldn't really bring in external consultants very easily because of the parameters, everything from HIPAA in hospitals to aspects at LANL. And what they did need was someone who could work with their legacy teams and explain to them how to roll out those devices and how to continue to maintain them. And that was an opportunity that was right there. And so despite kind of pursuing that when I was 12 and 13 and then ultimately into when I was 17, no one asked me of my credentials. It was always like really entertaining when we'd go from like these remote interactions into in-person meetings, and there was always like a little bit of a novelty and shock value to that. But I think what is so frustrating to me when looking at higher ed and education right now is that, like, if you think back 5 years right now, 5 years ago, like, we didn't have AirPods, right? And think of how much you see, people wearing AirPods. And I use that as an example because it's such like a rapid evolution and it's such a change in cultural dynamics. And there's so many opportunities there that wouldn't have been there 5 years ago. And yet you have curriculums that are being structured around teaching the youth these legacy skills and these kind of the legacy of technology or media, and that's great. Like, it's super important to have that strong foundation, but at the same time, there's this like marketing push for the universities that you come here, we will give you the skills, you will go get a high-paying job. And they have to do that to justify that investment. But the reality is, you're going there, you're getting a really strong foundation, but you have to continue to learn, you have to continue to build skills. And I think that's why you see so many people coming out of school being so frustrated, because that's not the message that's being conveyed. And that was something I learned really early on in the company I had started, and being able to continue to learn and continue to evolve as the market's changed, and something that I'm so excited about with New Collar, being able to kind of make it more skill-based, where you can go into the workspace, you can have a skill, but you can continue to evolve with that curriculum. And you're not just like going and being one and done.
Well, the whole laser industry thinks that I have a PhD in laser physics, and my education, so again, relating to working in an industry without a degree that is specific to what you're working in. And it was really that I apprenticed in an informal apprenticeship with my business partner who had a PhD, who did have a PhD. And I just worked in the lab and built lasers and did all the math, and I could do the math, and because I was trained as a pianist, and so all musicians can do math. And people still think, I mean, I still get letters, dear Dr. Boisvert, and it was really interesting because I would hire salespeople, so not even engineers, but I would hire salespeople who had non-engineering degrees. So I would hire, and actually there's a guy now who is the CEO. He ended up buying the company from the people we sold to, who ran it into the ground. And when I hired him, the engineers said to me, "You can't hire him, he's a biologist." And I said, well, I'm not an engineer. And they said, "Oh, you're different." And I think people like Jeff and I aren't different. I think we had a passion to learn something. We had a passion to really dig deep and learn the skills and to really have fun. And I think none of us in this room or in the world would not be able to not learn it. I think everyone can learn it, to say it in the positive sense, if you have the interest. And I think we're both examples of
And
people.
the support structure.
And, right, yeah, and the support structure. And finding a way, having the interest and then finding something like an apprenticeship program, or finding something like we're doing a pre-apprenticeship with a number of students who are here today from the Santa Fe Indian School. And I think that, sometimes you don't even know what you don't know or what might interest you. And these kinds of opportunities are so illuminating.
There's a great Donald Rumsfeld quote there, which is like maybe one of the only great things to come from Donald Rumsfeld is, and I'm totally going to butcher this, but there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and then there are unknown unknowns. And, I think we know our known knowns, but where we fall short right now is how to pursue and how to experiment and how to explore the unknown unknowns. And ultimately, that's where innovation and change really comes from, are those unknown unknowns, the questions that no one is even thinking about right now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so thank you, Jeff, for really launching me on my path of developing non-degree programs. And thank you for being here today.
The pleasure's all mine.
That was great. No. I want to talk a little about the three things that I think we need to foster innovation. I'm going to start with not the first one, because that is the topic of our next panel. I really believe you need innovative technologies, that you need things like 3D printers. We have our 3D printers running in the back. We have robotics. We have all kinds of fun tools. And then you need the training programs so people know how to use those tools. But we also, I believe, need a space that fosters innovation. And so one of the few things that I missed when I moved here was that my lab, after I sold my company, was in the Media Lab at MIT, which is one of the coolest places I've ever been. They have 2 endowed chairs from Lego, and that says it all. It was such a blast to be in there. But my office was in a building that was owned by MIT and run by the Cambridge Innovation Center. And it turned out that I would have lived there if I could. My kitchen had a Lego wall, so we could play Legos and meet other people. It was one of the most fun, innovative places. And I have been talking a lot with Vince, one of the founders of Meow Wolf, about this concept, and I've been thinking more and more about it and how can we bring innovative interior spaces to the fabulous buildings that we have. And I would like to call up Vince and John Rizzo, who is an innovator here, is doing a lot of work in Los Alamos, Albuquerque, and Santa Fe, and Dale Decker, who is an architect and designed the building that I actually have a lab in, the Higher Education Center here in Santa Fe. And we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of space. And if I need 2 more. Cheers. Oh, if we just move them more to the front. Thank you. I've lost Dale.
This works for me.
Oh.
This works here?
That's a
Yep.
good idea. So how many people here have been to Meow Wolf? Of course, because we're in Santa Fe. And actually, when I was at the end of feeling like I had to leave Cambridge, and my parents had passed, and I was overwhelmed, I came out for a rest in Santa Fe, and it was the grand opening of Meow Wolf, and it pushed me over the edge, and I thought, if I don't move now, I'm never going to move, and I moved like 3 months later. And lots of influences. So Vince, talk a little bit about space and how it fosters innovation, and maybe beyond Meow Wolf.
Yeah, sure. So when we opened House of Eternal Return, I was the CEO of the company at the time, and we knew that the House of Eternal Return was going to be like a fun, entertaining thing that people would enjoy as like an attraction, and that would be pretty things to take pictures of. But like pretty quickly, we started getting these reviews that as CEO I had to like take notice of, which was like these reviews that were like, oh my gosh, I went to Meow Wolf and it changed my life. Or I went to Meow Wolf and it made me see the world differently. And I was like, what is going on here? What is happening in what we created? Like how did what we create start to foster this feeling of transformation inside of folks? And so I read a book by a gentleman named Joseph Pine called The Experience Economy, which was written in the early 90s and kind of predicted the future of the economy as being an experiential one. And about 10 years after he wrote it, in the early 2000s, he amended it, and he actually added another chapter, which was about the transformation economy, which is beyond experience. And so I got a lot of information around that and started to understand what that word transformation meant. And it ties to innovation, and it ties to like where the imagination exists. And basically, what happens at Meow Wolf is that we provide a space to kind of dovetail off of what Jeff was saying, right? You know, in your last talk. Meow Wolf provides a space of the unknown, and it's within this unknown context. And it's unknown in multiple ways. It's unknown from a visual perspective, like you're in a world you've never seen before. But it's also unknown in the sense that like we don't operationalize the space. We don't say, here's the game you have to play, here's the problem you have to solve, here's the room you have to escape, you know, or this is how you do Meow Wolf. We actually just leave it totally unknown to the guest. They're allowed to do Meow Wolf however they want. And the thing about it is that when you go inside of Meow Wolf, the context is so unknown that you yourself as an individual, as an identity, have total freedom to explore that unknown.
Which we normally don't have in regular life.
Right. So it's kind of like got down to the heart of it, and it's like, okay, so what's happening inside of our space is that people are exploring and they're discovering. And that seems like a really basic thing, but it's actually really rare, especially for adults. Now, kids are exploring and discovering all the time because the world is unknown to them. So exploration and discovery, what's important about those things is that they can only happen within the context of the unknown. That if you're in the context of the known, there's nothing to explore and discover because it's already known. And the most significant apparatus of knownness that keeps us from exploring and discovering is actually ourself. It's our identity. So as we grow up and we become adults, we start to define for ourselves how the world is, what we like, how we talk, what we eat, who we hang out with, what our interests are. And we build this apparatus of knowability called Vince that, or what, you know, whatever your name is. And that keeps us from exploring and discovering. It keeps us from venturing. It keeps us from having the courage to enter into the unknown. And that's where innovation happens. And so, you know, it's funny, I have a client in Albuquerque right now who's talking about innovation space. And they have an innovation space. And I visited their innovation space, and there's no innovation. It's the most known space I've ever been in. It's like an office, you know?
Sterile.
Yeah, and it's like, in order to spark innovation, we need to literally have the courage to create spaces and create environments and landscapes that are unknown, which takes courage. It's risky.
It's real risky and scary, and people are scared. So Dale, how is kind of the interior side of creating space affecting how you design whole buildings?
Well, I think Vince said it, exploring and discovery. I want you to work with us on designing the classroom of the future.
Yeah, totally.
Because, I mean, you think about it, our kids have that exploring and discovery built into them, but we immediately put them in a box, desks, tables, chairs. We teach their left brain to do left brain things. Then we teach their right brain to do right brain things. And really, innovation occurs at the intersection of your left and right brain. And there's so many constraints that are out there relative to building codes and, all sorts of other things that start to create those boxes. But it's through innovations like yours and what you're doing and kind of breaking the mold that we as architects need to understand, need to apply, and that's what makes it exciting when, I'm even up here on the stage with you and with our designers that are working in those education environments. Getting the status quo to take risks is very, very difficult. And so we'll just send all those teachers and administrators to Meow Wolf and then ask them what they learned and what they discovered.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I see when we do professional development for teachers is that the teachers are almost afraid of the kinds of teaching that we do, which is project-based. And what happens is they are afraid of not having the right answer. And I always figure if I don't know the answer, we can find it. And hopefully the kid can show me how they found it, and we can create some methodology there of how did I find that answer. But I find there's a lot of fear in teaching, and when we let the kids run 3D printers and design things and fail, we say Fab Labs are safe places to fail. When we allow that to happen, then you start to see that interaction, and then the teachers start to be less afraid of, oh, I don't know the answer.
This is like why I always try to point back to the root of the issue. It's like it's not the school system, it's not the government, it's not the it's not the slow-moving parts of any bureaucracy. Like the root of the issue is actually inside of all of our own heads. Mm-hmm. Like we are, as an individual, afraid of the unknown, and we're wired this way. We are wired to be past-based identities because that's what's safe. I am who I have been, and I'm going to continue to be who I have been. And the work is to get yourself to a place where you're not who you have been, you are who you are becoming. And that you're willing to venture into the future. And we have this amazing technology inside of our head called the imagination, and it can create images. And we're so good at creating images that are past-based. That's called memory. We say, like, you can remember like something when you're 12 years old and the exact location, and you can remember what it looked like. Like, we can create that image in our head. But we're so bad at creating images that are future-based. It's like, oh, I kind of see what it looks like 3 years from now. I kind of see like what, you know what I mean? And we need to transition as humans into future-based beings. And I'm going to just bring up something a little controversial, but there's an amazing wave of therapeutics out there that actually do a great job of breaking down the past-based identity and getting us into future-based identities. And New Mexico is really well positioned. It took us 8 years to get weed legalized. Let's not do that again. Let's get out ahead of this new wave. I'm not going to use the word, but the new wave of therapeutics, because that is actually how we enter into the innovative space.
Yeah, and what you said right before that is interesting because, again, it's that fear. When people think about, like, starting a business, what am I going to do if it fails? How am I going to get the funding? What if, my wife leaves me because I'm working 100 hours a week? And it's all those fear-based things that stop us from innovating and stop us from imagining a future that can be just amazing.
So, Sarah, I think the interesting thing about New Mexico is that the state's built on centuries of history and culture. And if you step back at 400 or 500 years ago, I think the people in the state at that time were taking incredible risk. They were innovators in their own right with respect to culture and so on, but we don't really see it that way. And here we are several hundred years later where there's a mindset that's developed that is to some degree constrained by that history. But I would submit that Meow Wolf actually happened because of all those centuries of culture
absolutely.
and art. And Vince and his team had the fortitude to say, well, I can create a future that leverages those centuries of history and culture into something that is going to go forward in decades of prosperity going forward. And so those two ingredients together are pretty powerful. And if you think about spaces, I'll just sort of broaden the aperture a bit, because I spent most of my life in Silicon Valley after living in Albuquerque. And an office space in Silicon Valley is not an office space. There is an ecosystem in Silicon Valley that spans beyond the walls of the office, reaches the universities, reaches the investors, and there is a mindset that says if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, as opposed to don't fail. And there are many cultures in the world. Japanese culture, for example, is one of these cultures, others, where if you make a mistake, you're punished for it. In Silicon Valley, if you make a mistake, you're actually rewarded. And I have many colleagues who spent 10, 20 years, one startup after another, crashing and burning. But investors and their colleagues and their friends said, no, the next one will be the next one. And they were. And so the notion of innovation is just a series of near-death experiences that as an entrepreneur you try to avoid, right? And I'm certain that Vince can tell us lots of stories about near-death experiences. I can tell you lots of stories when I was at Apple about these things. And the key to entrepreneurship is saying, no, I do have the capability to change the world, and I'm not afraid to fail. And to the extent that we can create a space in New Mexico that enables that change of mindset and set examples, and I think Meowville is a great one, there are others in the state, then we now have the opportunity to sort of unlock what was historically centuries of really interesting innovation and culture into something more interesting going forward.
Yeah, the stories that my former husband, who was from this area, tells about just life on the ranch, and his father, when he was 16, needed some crop dusting, so he bought a plane with his money and taught himself to fly and became a crop duster and ended up training pilots in World War II because he had these skills and they were desperate for pilot trainers. And that's right here, the kinds of innovative things that people did to really move the needle. And Dale, you were, John was talking, I could see the wheels turning there about innovation that's happened.
Yeah, I agree with John and Vince. I think that innovation is part of our DNA in New Mexico. And you can just look at it in the architecture, the natural environment, what we see every day that we might take for granted, that does get translated into the places and spaces that we build and do. But I think we're at kind of a tipping point in our state. Either we're going to recognize that that's a strength and build on it, or we're going to revert back to the status quo of what's safe, and we're just going to be in the same position 10, 15, 20 years from now. Yeah. And that's the challenge for everybody in this room, and quite frankly, for everybody in the business community and other places, is we're going to have to be bold. We're going to have to make strategic investments around designing education systems that are really relevant and designed in a way that pulls out the best of our students and our kids. So, I just feel compelled. I'm kind of on the horizon of my career, but I'm always kind of pushing for what can we do next? What is that we can do? And how do we enable that as kind of the tribal elders that are in this room, the next generation, to step up, be bold, be brave, take risks, and do the kinds of things that's going to move our state and create a better quality of life for everybody in New Mexico.
The next 10 years can shape decades for New Mexico. In the pandemic, if there is a bright side, it creates an opportunity for us here that we could turn our strengths and our weaknesses into incredible assets. Before I moved to Santa Fe full-time 3 years ago, I was running a company in San Francisco, and our employees in the Bay Area had an average commute of 2.4 hours per day. I spent 3 hours a day commuting from my home 60 miles away to my office. We were on Zoom because we had offices in Bangalore and Dublin and all over the place. But the thing that was interesting was that now, with the pandemic, we've demonstrated that for the most part, companies can be productive no matter where their employees happen to reside. They don't necessarily have to reside and work in the same place. And if we look at New Mexico and look at the rural community and the indigenous communities, we actually, if we had the broadband infrastructure in place, with Senator Padilla's working to achieve, we could have the most diverse, both geographically and otherwise, workforce in the country, and enable the massive remote workforce across New Mexico that plays directly into these trends. But we need education, we need broadband to reach them, and there's no other place in the country that offers the quality of life and the culture and the resilience of the people and the diversity of the state that we have. And so why not say remote work is a fantastic thing? New Mexico could be the leader in that regard. All of the folks that might have been disenfranchised because they can't participate in great paying jobs because they have to leave their communities, they don't have to leave anymore. There's an organization called Film Prize Junior, which is a foundation that's doing film, allows middle schoolers and high schoolers to create films. And there was a group of kids in Cuba, and I don't know how many of you have been to Cuba, but there's not a lot of fiber in Cuba. And so what the kids and the teachers did is they bought a Starlink broadband wireless internet connection, and they were building their film over Starlink in a matter of weeks. Now, that was great entrepreneurship, incredible resilience and desire to do something different in Cuba, and they just did it. Well, why couldn't we do that all over the state? We could, if we chose to.
And there are ways, even for things that you think of as needing hands-on, there are ways to do that. And with Youngstown State, you'll hear from Jennifer Odo later, we have a program where our digital badges, our micro-certifications are online, but we drop ship a 3D printer to the student at home. And so now they are able to have a real hands-on experience, and we have a monitoring system where my apprentices monitor the students and communicate with them and interact with them and check if they're stuck and help get them unstuck. And it is a wonderful interactive process for people where it's not conducive to coming into a lab or a school. So it really opens up a lot of possibility. I think that it all starts with where you are and the space you're in, and I'm so thrilled to have you all talk with us today. And any last thought that someone wants to add?
Just one briefly. So I think the space that Vince created at Meow Wolf and the space you created at HEC are actually not physical spaces. They're that, but they're a mindset about how New Mexico and new-collar jobs and other things can be very, very different. And that's the thing that, at least for me, I think we owe a great debt to Vince and his team, and Sarah, to you, because you've now sort of said and demonstrated that the world can be shaped differently in the future. And you did it through an entity, right? But it was the mindset that is the more important piece. It's the piece that enables everybody in the state to say, well, Sarah did it, Vince did it, well, maybe I can do it too.
On a very practical, very actionable topic, as we discuss, new collar jobs and growing the economy in New Mexico, and the types of employers that we could bring here and the types of workers that we could retain, we don't have housing. And this is almost at the crux of this dilemma for people, where where we're afraid of who we're becoming is that there's, the NIMBYs win out, and the NIMBY voice wins out because of the fear of who we're becoming and wanting to try to remain who we have been. None of this is going to, we're not going to do any of this if we don't have housing. And 10 people can show up to a planning commission meeting, or 10 people can show up to a city council meeting and can literally shut down hundreds of units of housing. We've seen it. Even when it's done by a nonprofit housing developer who's willing to build you a $5 million park, it's crazy right now. And so if we care about this stuff, we need to show up to planning commission. We need to show up to city council. We need to literally say yo, we want to grow the economy in our state and we don't have anywhere for our workers to live. And everybody else, everyone else is getting priced out. That's a real thing that needs more, we need more pro-housing voices in order for any of this to make sense.
That's a really good point. And so our next summit, I'm going to bring a model of a house that I am 3D printing with Habitat Dallas. And it's really interesting because it allows you to have shapes, kind of talking about space again, allows you to have shapes that you wouldn't have imagined, and the interiors are so creative and so interesting, but they're affordable, and you can typically build a house in a week. And so next summit, we'll start there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
I have for many years built equipment for Lannel, and I can't tell you what it did. And so I have a long history with Lannel, and as most of you know, Lannel is, I think, the largest employer in New Mexico. And I really, with the work that I do in terms of changing the kinds of education that we're looking at, I'm really interested in how employers are changing their hiring practices. And when, again, Ginny Rometty, my hero, was, I think she had just retired or was the CEO of IBM at the time. She and Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, were on a task force for the Trump White House. And they put together a series of programs that convinced the White House to issue a directive that actually required that all US government federal agencies start to re-examine their hiring practices to evaluate skills, not just degrees. We're seeing now the states following suit. I think Maryland was the first that I read about, and it was my good friends at Opportunity at Work who worked with the governor's office, and now the state of Maryland is requiring that their hiring practices evaluate skills, not just degrees. Colorado followed suit, I think, a week or two ago. I just saw the announcement from Colorado, and we're seeing more and more states looking at reevaluating, because we've had this creep that has gone up where, it used to be you just needed an undergraduate degree, and now you need a PhD. And we also see the pathways that happen. And in my company, so the books on your table actually have augmented reality in them. And in the front, there is the instructions. But there is a picture in this book of a man named John Ford. I don't remember what page it's on. But John came to work for my laser company. He had flunked out of community college, we called it at the time, and he flunked out of community college, loved math, and he hated everything else. And so he just couldn't make it. He ended up coming to work for us running a laser system. So he just had to, you know, press a button. Here we are 20 years later, and John tells his story. He is one of the photographs that triggers a video that comes up. And he says, every day that I come to work isn't always a good day. Any job that you have a bad day. But how can you have really bad days if you get to play with lasers every day? And he's now been there 20 years and is now an engineer. So we pay for people to get degrees, and so he ended up going into the University of Maryland program and became an engineer. Many times it's those pathways that people need. And so I'm just really thrilled that we're going to be able to talk about LANL's changes in hiring practices and kind of what you see on the future. So nice that you're here. Do you want to pull a chair closer to me? These are great. You may have got these. I'm going to let you give us a little bio, a background of where you've, I think it's on, where you've been and how you ended up at LANL.
Okay. Yes, you can hear me. I can hear myself. I'm Lori Monfiletto. I'm the Chief Human Resource Officer for Los Alamos National Laboratories. Some of you might know me. I formerly was the Vice President of Human Resources at PNM. So a lot of great things coming from Albuquerque, but really happy to be in northern New Mexico. My husband is from northern New Mexico, so it was nice to come home. Many of you think, when you think of LANL, do you think PhDs, scientists, wow, people who have really a lot of degrees? Let me dispel that. We do have those, and it's great. But what we also have are a number of positions that we're truly right now hiring. Project managers, welders, machinists. You know, those positions are just as important as or even more important in these days as to the accomplishment of our goals. Los Alamos is hiring. When I started 3 years ago, we were at 8,000 employees, regular and term. We're now at almost 11,000. We're heading to 15,000, which will make us one of the largest employers. Right now, we're one of the largest employers, but we are not the largest quite yet. We're hiring, and we have to think very much, how are we thinking about hiring? Gentlemen that we're talking about earlier about housing, that's a real deal. That's a real issue. What are the other constraints? We think it's fabulous here, but not everyone wants to live in New Mexico. I don't know why. I've lived here 35 years, so I think it's great. So we have to think differently about the people we're recruiting. So who are we recruiting, and who have we been recruiting all this time? You. Everyone in New Mexico. We're recruiting northern New Mexico, and we think about it very differently and we've done that for a long time, and people recognize that. When we have internship programs from scientists to engineers to technicians to support personnel, our goal is to keep that person here. Our rate of keeping interns is at about 75%. That is much higher than any of our competitors in New Mexico or frankly within the laboratory system. We want people who live here to work for us. And we think we provide really great jobs, and we provide opportunities. It's such a large laboratory. If you don't want to keep doing what you're doing, you can move to something else. And we have a lot of people who do that right now. But how we think about hiring really is, we look at the person. We really try and figure out, what motivates you, what makes you tick, what makes you think about things differently. I like the folks who may not have been the highest candidates in high school. You know why? Because they're thinking differently. They're not thinking along the norm. They're thinking very differently about, gosh, how can I reach to the same end state? But there's got to be other ways to think about how creatively that you can get there. Those are the folks I'm always thinking about.
You know, that's interesting because in the research that I did for the book before this one, The New Color Workforce, I interviewed 200 employers on what were the skills they were looking for in operators and technicians, not engineers, because at that time, this was in like 2017, at that time, we were okay on engineers, but we were just desperate for CNC machinists and welders and people like that. And you know, I'd been an employer in the field, and I kind of knew what I thought they were going to say, but I was overwhelmed that 95% of the companies that I interviewed, and it was Fortune 10 all the way to startups in every industry, and 95% of the people said they needed problem solving. And I think you see that in
Absolutely. The problems, you know, we're facing large problems in the world right now, right? And we're directly affecting some of those problems. But what we're finding is, how do we think about things differently? And it goes to your point about problem solving. The students in high school and college that may not have been the A+ students actually have figured out how to be successful. I wasn't an A+ student, and I figured out how to be successful. And that's because I think differently. They think differently, and they solve problems differently. And that's what we need in our new economies, and that's what we need at Los Alamos, too.
And that's what we need in education. People will say to me, and I once heard an executive from Ford say to me, "You can't teach problem solving," and I thought, "You've never been in my lab." We teach problem solving throughout the MIT Fab Lab network. So we have about 2,000 Fab Labs around the world, and my lab is one of them. And it is something that can be instilled. And again, as I was saying earlier about the teachers, you know, we need to do professional development so that our educators are used to a more problem-solving approach as opposed to a traditional kind of, you know, learn information and regurgitate it. And so I think that those collaborations with employers are really important so that we are teaching the skills that the employers are looking for.
Right, and our community partnership organization, Rebecca Estrada is over there, and she really helps with the education part of it. We're actually working with high schools. We're actually, and colleges, putting programs together. In colleges, Northern New Mexico University, we have a technician program, and we're working with them to bring those students who are interested in that world. We're training them, we're paying them to be trained, and then they're coming off and becoming very productive and contributing to our workforce and contributing to our goals for the future.
Lanel is also supporting our pre-apprenticeship with the Santa Fe Indian School, which is a 2-year project. And we have a registered apprenticeship, which we will talk about in one of our next sessions. And it's a wonderful apprenticeship, but when you can have the pre-apprenticeship and people start to understand how fun these kinds of technologies are and how fun the jobs are and engaging and well-paying. And so we appreciate Lanel's support of that project in particular.
Yeah, we do a number of those things because we do identify and understand that sometimes when students are kind of exploring what they want to do for the future, they may not really understand what those kinds of things are. And so the pre-apprenticeships and the ability to do those different things, it broadens their horizons, and they can better identify, what would I like to do? What are the things out there that are hands-on? Just in my past history, I'm not talking Lanel, I'm talking about myself. When even my own children were looking at what should I do for the future, it didn't always fit. I have one who thankfully is graduating from college, but she dropped out from high school because it just wasn't doing it for her. And she was able to figure out what she wanted to do, and now she's well on her way. She's going to be a social worker, and we're thrilled. That's exactly what the schools need, because when you talk about education and getting people ready for pre-apprenticeship, we're talking about that, but we also recognize that they need support. They need the social support. They need the support of the community. And being able to have that kind of support, those social programs to help them get a leg up in many times, that's really important too.
It's good to hear that you're reaching down to the high schools, but one of the questions I have is for the, I believe they call them paid interns, that are the starting entry-level jobs for people like your machinist. My understanding is that still requires an associate's degree right now. And are there plans to expand that?
There are. We're also looking at, and we're also right now looking at, other experiences are very much important than the associate's degree. So we're actually changing that to or experience or those kinds of things. So we're moving in that right direction. And, when we talk about your pre-apprenticeship, when we talk about some other apprenticeships that we're working on right now, that is the experience they're getting. And then they will be ready to hire on full-time with full-time benefits and full-time salary that's commensurate with those types of activities. So no, we're definitely looking at the experience. We understand in the world today, it isn't always the degree, but it may be the experience or the thought process. So.
Yeah. That's really good news.
Yeah.
That's really good news, because we are seeing an awful lot of programs both at CNM, at Santa Fe Community College, at several of the schools in New Mexico that do great work training people. A 4-year degree means that you're stuck those 4 years, and if you drop out, there's nothing to show for it. And one of the things I really like about our digital badge program is at the end, you have something to hold. You can show a credential that it's not a degree, but it shows an expertise and a certain number of skills. And I think that's really great news. That's the best thing I've heard in a long time. Yeah.
We've had to, when you're an institution that, part of it is very much education, we want people to have education. That's not the point. But the point is, we look at education very differently now. It doesn't have to be that degree. It could be those experiences and things like that. Would we love the degree and that allows that person to have more experiences? Sure. But at the same time, what we're striving for and what we're trying to get, we can get it in different ways, just as the students can get it in different ways too.
That is exactly right, and the world has changed. And as Jeff was talking about, our instructors have marveled at the Santa Fe Indian School students because they're digital natives. And so last year, we, through Ready New Mexico, ran a program for unemployed workers. The average age was 45. They were about 50-50 men and women. It was a 3D printing master badge. And, the digital natives are, just go so much faster because it's work that they already are familiar with. Even though they may have never 3D printed, just how you play with the computer is, and as Mia was saying about, her son, and so for kids that learn that quickly, to do a course is an eternity. It takes forever. And it really changes the time element of it. And then you can do more depth.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're finding are students, when you do hands-on, that's when they get oh, this is what this is about. Because theory in a book is very different than actual do. And what we're finding even in our pre-apprenticeships and our apprenticeship programs and our paid internship programs that start as soon as high school, when they actually see what they're doing and they actually do those things, that changes their trajectory. And we like to offer that. And our paid internship program is very important to LANL. I'll tell you, I just, even in human resources, we have people who've worked at LANL for 20 years. They started in high school. And that's a badge of honor for us because they see the value of people starting and being at an employer and being there for a long period of time and having a really nice career out of it.
Yeah. And you do a lot in biotech. And I know that because I've built microfluidic devices for some of your departments. And talk about kind of the things, we think of LANL as a place that builds bombs, but the world has changed.
It has. And so did you know that LANL was instrumental in identifying the DNA sequencing for the COVID vaccine?
No.
Those are things that we're working on right now. Those are the things we do more. Yes, we definitely work on weapons. No doubt about it. But we have a very strong science, technology, and engineering organization, and there's lots of opportunities in there. We work with biotech. Unfortunately, right now, we have a very huge fire science organization for exactly what's happening in northern New Mexico right now. Biotech, you're absolutely right. We're working on different ways of, similar to the vaccine, different ways of sequencing. It could be DNA, it could be other things that we're working on. That is actually a very significant component of our work right now, and a very significant component of what makes up LANL. So not always, not to say that our primary work, which is weapons, in the world today, that unfortunately that is needed, but there is a significant part of our work that is focused on how we can improve the world as we see it right now.
And so much of what people don't realize is DoD funding actually is dual use. And so for many companies, do any of you know how the Dust Buster started? So this was not DoD, but NASA. And Stanley Black & Decker, which at the time was just Black & Decker, got a contract from NASA to design a mechanism for picking up moon rocks, because you couldn't have an extension cord from the moon, and they needed to have a little vacuum. And so they designed the Dust Buster, and of course, it's dual use. And what happens in dual use is the government keeps the IP for the military or the application that they're looking at, but then you have the capability to commercialize the product. And so we built the laser for LASIK, and almost 100% of my R&D was funded by SBIRs. We had 16 phase 2 SBIRs. And so I don't know what they were doing with the laser for LASIK, but we never heard. Part of it was the old Star Wars program, if you remember the Strategic Defense Initiative. So who knows what they were doing, but we were able to commercialize that laser. And those dual-use programs are really important for funding for startups.
Absolutely. We appreciate that we have a number of startups that have come from Los Alamos. and certainly from our other national laboratory, Sandia, who's here. But we take a lot of pride in that, because there might be something that's out there that we go, we could do that a little differently, and we can use this application for something different. We're working on some of the issues with hydrogen. We're working on the renewable issues. We're partnering with some of the utilities right now to figure out other ways of using our renewable resources and using the technologies we've been using for different means to use towards the renewable world. So lots of great things happening. And that's why you really want to find people who think differently, because you take an application that had something like this and they go, oh, but couldn't we use this application for something else like renewable energy? Sure enough, and that was actually one of our technicians that identified that, and sure enough, that started a whole new line of work for us.
That's really cool. It's, coming from science, it's fundamental research that we need, and we're so thankful that the government labs do fund that fundamental research that then can be turned into or engineered into products or into other kinds of things. But without that fundamental understanding of science and what comes out of all of our national labs, I mean, we wouldn't be able to make that leap to the applications.
Absolutely. I don't know how many of you, but did you take physics in high school? I had to take physics in high school. That was torturous. But second semester of physics was actually really great for me because we actually did things. When I started doing it with my hands, I was like, oh, this is what we meant by all this stuff. That's the importance, and that's where I think when we have hands-on and people can learn hands-on and understand, and our students can learn hands-on, you would be surprised at how amazing our students can do. I once went to a high school that worked on project, really was based on project-based learning. And so the students were building something. And when I said, do you know you're doing trigonometry right now? They were like, no. I'm just measuring this to learn how to make this. And I said, no. That's actually trigonometry. You just mastered trigonometry. And I think that that's an important thing for all of us to understand. If there's a way to do it to make it a real-world application, it makes all the difference in the world. And that was the same with me many, many years ago when I did physics, and that is the same today.
No, that's a really good point. There's that famous Benjamin Franklin quote that I won't remember, but that is basically, it says that. It basically says, if you let me do it, I will remember.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of us, I'm sure in high school, dissected various and sundry things. It certainly reminded and helped me remember, and helps me remember to this day, oh yeah, this long, how the brain works, that type of thing. I still remember that from high school, and I think a lot of people do too.
Yeah. And it's fun.
That wasn't too fun for me. I passed out once even, so, but you're right. It is fun to actually understand what you're learning and put it into a practical application. And that is what we do at Los Alamos for our paid internships. We truly want people to learn by touching, doing, experiencing it to understand. And be able to keep interns at a 75% rate, that's pretty amazing. But that tells you that once they understand what it is, they want to keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, we're very thankful that you have those programs, and we need to have more interaction now that those programs are opening up a little bit more with some of our alternative training programs.
And we would love it. That's definitely where we were heading. Like I said, those alternative programs, those kids have an amazing creative mind that we need. And it doesn't, as to your point, a degree doesn't always signify that.
Yeah. Well, it's been so much fun talking to you.
Thank you. It's been fun being up here.
And you're going to come visit my lab.
I do. I get to visit, I think, the week of the 23rd, so I'm very
Yes.
excited about that.
It'll be a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Well, we've been sitting a long time talking about moving, so it's probably time for a comfort break. And we're supposed to come back. I think we're a little ahead of schedule. Yeah, we are. So I think we'll probably take a half hour. And please stop and see the interesting technology and education programs that our sponsors have had. We're very appreciative of them coming out. And also our sponsors included the city of Santa Fe, and Rich Brown could not be here, but the Economic Development Department, PNM, and is PNM here? Oh, hello. It's hard to see with the lights. And we also had sponsorship from Santa Fe Community College, and Chris Swadin is here with the Department of Continuing Education and Contract Training. And thank you all so much for everyone who supports us. So we'll be back in about a half an hour. Okay, we're done socializing for the moment. Yeah, so I will send you the pictures. I'm sure she's I don't see her, but we'll catch her today because I mean, well, all my pictures she does. Say it again. Yeah. Okay. I am so thrilled that my two really dear friends came out from the East Coast, Jennifer Odo from Youngstown State University and Diana Elliott from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. And the reason that I love them is that I've been trying to get a registered apprenticeship off the ground and worked on it for almost a year. It was about 9 months, and I threw up my hands. I could have had a baby in the time that I had been working on it, and I was so frustrated. And Jennifer heard me speak. The book that is on your tables was actually released at the Consumer Electronics Show, and we were in the CEO's book club, and Jennifer heard me speak and came up to me and said, oh, we really have to work with you. And people say that all the time, right? You get off stage, oh, we really have to work with you. And I was like, yeah, right. And she was at IBM at the time, and she says, can you have breakfast tomorrow? And I thought, yes, I can. And 45 days later or something, we had a registered apprenticeship. She introduced me to Diana, who funded the startup cost for our apprenticeships. And so I guess I'd like to start. People, I think, don't know what registered apprenticeships are. I think we hear about it being something that happens in Europe or for HVAC people. And I would love for one of you, whoever wants to kind of talk about how is a registered apprenticeship different than like an internship, and some of the great stats you have on apprentices, and why they're important.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. I could probably talk the whole panel about that, so I'll just be brief. So registered apprenticeship is different than internships. This is one of those big myths that we hear all the time. It gets conflated in people's heads. The reason it's different is because you're actually hiring this apprentice. You're treating them like an employee with this structured program that involves coursework, but it also involves a lot of on-the-job learning. So I loved on that last panel where it really talked about the project-based learning, right? That's what gets people really excited. That's what hammers home the concepts that they're learning in the classroom. So the best design programs have that feedback between classroom and on the job. The other nice thing about apprentices is that they're paid, right? So this makes it a viable option for people from underserved communities. This makes it a viable option for working parents to a certain extent. And it basically creates a more inclusive space to welcome in people who maybe traditionally have not been able to start a career pathway through the college first mentality. And then I think registered apprenticeship, the other nice thing about this is that it assigns, because it's registered with the Department of Labor or with a state, it has a certain gravitas to it. It also has a credential that somebody leaves that program with. So even if they decide after the end of a year or 2-year program that maybe they don't want to do this anymore or they want to go to a different employer, they that credential with them. So yeah, in terms of stats, you're absolutely right that we are not doing enough of these in the US. I mean, it's just a fraction of people who go into registered apprenticeship. And it's not because the apprentices don't want these opportunities. It's really because we've failed to get the message out and we've failed to really get employers to create more of those opportunities. In Germany, 55% of people go into apprenticeship programs, right? And you would certainly never think of Germany as not being an innovative or high-tech country.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the other important thing about the registered apprenticeships is that there is, in most states, funding for the employers, that the employers are able to get a lot of that covered. I think in New Mexico, the JTIP program, I think actually their WIOA money is connected with that. And I've been working with them on not just hiring new people, but also bringing in apprentices. And I think you're exactly right. It's the lack of cognition of what do you think of? You think of an HVAC program, right?
And I think to your point, Sarah, many in the room associate apprenticeships with the trades and construction industry. And about 4 or 5 years ago, during my work at IBM, I was one of the fortunate individuals when Ginny Rometty coined New Collar. I was on the team to help bring the New Collar mission and vision to life. And the first pillar of that work was apprenticeships in the tech industry. So this was a departure from what we've always known as apprenticeships in the trades and construction. And we decided to take a competency-based approach, which basically said an apprentice can evolve through a program at their own pace as long as they're mastering the skills needed in that program. And so during my IBM days, we launched apprenticeships for 30 different occupations. I mean, think about everybody in this room. I bet you all have done apprenticeship work throughout your career, right? You had your first job, you had to learn skills, right? And so we really looked at it a little differently, and we have created apprenticeships for cybersecurity, software engineering, project management, business analysis, data science, sales. They're all earn and learn opportunities, so why not put structure around it and tap into a different demographic? And so the tech sector has really taken off. IBM in the first 2 years hired over 500 apprentices. We formed a national coalition with CTA, which is where I met the fabulous Sarah. And we helped companies like Microsoft, Bosch, Sony Electronics, and startups as well really reimagine what their talent pipelines could look like. And I will tell you, what's great about apprenticeship as well is the retention rate. And Diana could probably speak a little bit more to this, but I will tell you at the IBM and some of the other clients we've served, 96% retention. Where else are you going to find a program that's keeping employees? I mean, think about what that means for the top and bottom line of your organization. And Diana, you can probably talk a little bit more about some of the successes.
Yeah, so as part of our intermediary project, where we've been able to help Sarah and work with Jennifer, we've worked with, again, big tech companies, including Google, all the way down to a sole proprietor who basically hired her first employees as apprentices. It's been tremendously rewarding to sort of see all of these experiences. And I'll say there's nothing more exciting than helping Google launch their first national apprenticeship program and then hearing the apprentices speak to how they can't believe their luck that they wake up every morning and they work for Google. And these were, people who may have dropped out of college, may not have seen college as the pathway, and now they're thriving and succeeding at, a household name company. It's really something to see. And again, if we had more of these opportunities in this country, I think that's where we could really start to see more of that creativity and innovation. Kind of tapping into that innovation piece, we've heard that some of these apprentices have become innovators even within their first months on the job. They're thinking differently, they're presenting new ideas, or they come from diverse backgrounds that tech has traditionally sort of not welcomed and embraced, and now they have this pathway. They're bringing these new ideas and they're raising and elevating issues for the organization, so the organization becomes better.
Well, we were one of those groups. So our and you were all excited to read our press release. So our apprentices won a competition that was sponsored by Knowles Electronics, and it was to take a Knowles sensor that was an audio sensor that could detect sound, and what our apprentices came up with was being able to detect, being in New Mexico, a campfire that had not gone out. So you could hear the crackling of the campfire, and then it would send a signal to the forest ranger so that the forest rangers could then come and put the campfire out. So now you're catching it before it actually becomes a forest fire, which is kind of the point. And we beat out a whole bunch of universities, our little group, our little Fab Lab. And there were 5 winners, and the others were all either from colleges or from companies. And it was a wonderfully innovative idea that they had. And like we were talking about in one of the previous sessions, of real problem solving, of solving real life problems, not just making Christmas decorations. And I think that is really a great point. And talking about the retention, don't you feel like a big part of the retention is because it's a partnership when people come together?
It is. Think about the retention factor, right? We are giving people who never had an opportunity. I look at some of the apprentices throughout the years where we've hired some individuals who were on government assistance, mothers, and we put them through an aptitude test. They demonstrated that they had the aptitude to learn and that they had the aptitude to do some of these jobs. Paid them a $45,000 a year salary in Columbia, Missouri. And see those individuals thrive. And so it's that structured environment. But think about that. When somebody does something nice for you, right? When somebody's invested in you, you invest back. And I think it's a great way for companies to really demonstrate their commitment to the employees. And it's just, and then the employees are also giving back. Diana mentioned how, there's innovators coming into these programs. When we launched the program at IBM, we had a Skechers shoe store salesman who just could not get even through community college. We hired him into the program. Now, you have to have a little bit of experience. You just can't say, I want to be a software engineer overnight and go into a program. You've got to demonstrate, and this is where pre-apprenticeship really becomes a great catalyst for the pipelines for apprenticeship programs. But within 3 months, this individual, the Skechers shoe store salesman, had a patent pending at IBM. Wow. So, we've talked about that today. These students who are not emerging into into college pathways, they think differently. And that's the innovators that we want in our organizations. And, we can't be, right now, too, we can't be we can't create diverse offerings, we can't create diverse products if we don't infuse diversity into our talent pipelines. And I know Diana could probably speak a little bit about that as well. And even Sarah, the work that you've done to bring diversity into your apprenticeship program.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to, we've been working with a consortium of HBCUs in South Carolina. And if you know anything about sort of traditional tech, it's very white, it's very male. So by working with HBCUs, we're creating opportunities for a lot of black women, frankly, to get a foot in the door of tech companies and tech occupations. And it's been really gratifying working with this consortium because there is now this built-in, even though they are degree seeking students, there's now this pipeline built in where they have a job that they start while they're working on their curriculum, and they are able, again, it's that learning and putting into practice that they're able to do. They're able to earn money, which helps defray these huge student loan costs that they might have. And they're developing that portfolio of 1 to 2 to 3 years experience that all of these tech companies say entry-level job, but they're still saying 2 to 3 years experience, which just hurts my head sometimes. So having this portfolio as they finish this degree, it can be really life-changing. And you're able to create these opportunities in a state where they want to stay. These students want to stay in South Carolina. They want to give back to their community. And I'm sure the same is said for New Mexico, right? When you hire people from the community, they want to stay and give back.
No, that's exactly right. And at the end, we're going to hear a few words from our apprentices. But our program started during COVID. And so most of our people were people who were displaced COVID workers, mostly from the hospitality industry, the kind of service industry, and were unemployed. And so it was a great timing for people to now move out of, a job area that was more unstable to a job that is stable in tech, because tech jobs tend to be more stable. We didn't lay off one employee during COVID. We built 30,000 face shields for the Navajo and the Pueblos and the hospitals for the Pueblos. We did tons of other kinds of medical device work, PPEs, and more advanced research on again, talking about innovation on using antimicrobial materials in base mass. We were working with Mitsubishi. So it's, and I also find it, when you're working with something like 3D printing, which is really creative and really innovative, it also kind of elevates the students' self-confidence of, as opposed to saying, well, I was a Pizza Hut worker, but now you're working in doing something really fun and cool. And so our apprenticeship is for 3D printing technicians. It was developed in collaboration with America Makes, the Institute of 3D Printing, the accelerator that started in the Obama administration. I think they're out of DOD, actually. And is in Youngstown, is a neighbor of Jennifer's. And I'm interested in developing an apprenticeship, mostly because of Meow Wolf and their needs. I'm interested in an apprenticeship for all of these digital fabrication skills. So we would expand it, probably have it be a 2-year program. Right now it's 1 year. We also use the IBM IT, a lot of those badges that they have. And so our digital badges were approved by the U.S. Department of Labor as the framework for our apprenticeship. So it's been really wonderful for our digital badges, because now not only do we have the seal of approval from America Makes and industry, we also have it from USDOL, and I think that makes a difference.
And we are using those badges and credentials as part of our pre-apprenticeship training program. Right now, with the help of Sarah, we've been able to launch 20 high school students and college students. So it's interesting that we're starting to have both go through some of these badging programs. But a lot of people, are fearful of apprenticeships. And I think the programs like Sarah has created with the New Collar Innovation Center is spot on. It's designed to help bring the training to the employers, to the students, and make it easier, right? If we look at what a registered apprenticeship is, it's a job opportunity. It is a structured training program with applied experiences. So really, let's keep it simple. It's three things that the employers have to bring to the table. And with the work that Sarah's doing here with the digital badges, you've mentioned that you're using IBM credentials. Credentials have really democratized learning. And so we have now the ability to really bridge different pieces of training together. So it might be a hybrid type of component, which is what we do at our programs at Youngstown State University. They start off with pre-apprenticeship. It could be either synchronous or asynchronous. And then they come into other pathways. We build out a pathway using multiple vendors. So we may have, leverage IBM's New Collar professional skills badge to help develop the soft skills. And then when we go into technical skills, we leverage whether, be the additive badges or working with other organizations to package up the best experience that's going to teach these apprentices. So building the training program actually has become a lot easier, especially post-COVID in the world of digitization. So when you think about it, and then, pairing it up with a strong mentor in your organization who can help this individual along the way, right? Apprentices coming in are typically coming from a different demographic. They may not have the work experience, the degree, and so they need a little bit more just to help them boost their confidence, give them that sense of belonging, and help them through these pathways. And it's just really a cool experience. And I know everyone thinks that it's a big lift, but really, it's not.
But it wasn't hard for me because of you two. And I have to say, I had registered apprenticeships in Maryland when I had my laser manufacturing company. And just reading the paperwork, as you say, gives you a headache. It was so challenging, and I spent so much time on it. It turned out to be a good program, but it was very hard. And you are your project was an intermediary, and can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so there's all sorts of intermediaries, right? There are intermediaries who might do introductions or connections. Other intermediaries like us try to be full service. So even though we're a research and policy organization, we have this TA arm, technical assistance arm, where we're doing more and more of this work because there's such a huge need out there. The paperwork is really daunting to people. But once you have somebody kind of walk you through and explain, well, it's really just about pay rates and deciding what you want to pay these people. It's deciding the occupation, deciding what they're going to want to do on the job. When you break it down, it becomes much easier. And frankly, the way that I explain this to employers is, well, at Urban, I'm evaluated on a series of competencies. Certainly you're evaluating your employees on a series of competencies, or you're assessing whether they're performing well on the job in some capacity. So it's really just a matter of writing that down and working that out. But yeah, the paperwork, frankly, can be really daunting for people. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to kind of get through that step. But as Sarah has said, the advantage is that you have this stamp of quality to your program, and it opens up a lot of funding. So you can pretty much train individuals for a fraction of the cost. And the tagline I like too is that you hire people for potential rather than credentials, right? So you're creating that opportunity by doing a little bit of paperwork, but it is life-changing for these people who go through these programs.
Yeah, it really is. But the intermediaries coming on board, I think, was such a change for the employers. And this one was a breeze. There are many frameworks out there, and both of you pointed me to the existing America Makes framework that you had worked on with, I think, SME and some other groups. And so when I went through the framework, I pretty much just had to adjust the framework to meet my company's needs. So to be clear, it's through my manufacturing little group that actually is where our trainees get their experience, their hands-on experience, and that's how I fund the nonprofit. I fund the nonprofit by us doing jobs. We just completed, and again, these were my apprentices. We just completed building an enclosure for a medical device. It is a labeling machine for anesthetics, for labeling the, when they put it, the vials, when they put the medicine from the vials into the syringe. And I guess there's this huge problem, we probably shouldn't know this, but there's this huge problem of the medication being either the wrong medication or being expired. And this guy in town, in Santa Fe, used AI and found a way to identify the vials, because sometimes they'll just put it in the refrigerator, and if it's not used for a while, if it's an unusual medication, they don't realize, and they're in a hurry, they're trying to get the patients in and out of surgery. And he invented this machine, but needed an enclosure. And so we 3D printed all of the prototypes for him. And now we're doing short production runs. We're starting with, I think, we started with 10 a month, and he's going to go to 50 a month, which with 3D printing is within the ballpark. You get beyond that, you need to move to other kinds of technologies. But it's amazing to see what people can do. And I think it comes back to, and you must see this at Youngstown State, it's trusting that people can solve the problems. You know, trusting that the student is going to be able to figure it out.
You know, it is trusting them, but it's also giving them the support along the way. And that's where mentorship is such a huge component of a successful apprenticeship program. You know, these students are coming in, these apprentices are coming in with maybe not the life experiences or the educational background, and being able having them come in and learn through the process. And we can't stress enough, you know, apprenticeships are typically about a year in length. You know, especially competency-based apprenticeships. So it's really making sure you have the right resources that they're aligned to, whether it be the project-based work, the mentors, to really guide them. And I loved hearing, I think it was Meow Wolf, and the first is, you know, letting them understand it's okay to fail and putting them in that safe environment. But, you know, I've had some wonder, you know, I came in early yesterday, and I spent some time walking around Santa Fe and seeing all the art galleries and the creativity that's here, but also seeing the opportunity that this community has. You have an amazing opportunity to give back, to start creating new pathways for the individuals in these communities. You know, Diana and I were talking, there was about 3 or 4 years ago, Brookings Institute published an article on talent economic development. And what is the number one driver, to my economic development professionals in the room, what is the number one driver for companies to decide whether they're going to, you know, other than tax incentives, but it's the workforce. In Ohio, we just landed a $10 billion investment. Intel's coming in to put semiconductor plants into Ohio, which is extraordinary for us because they felt confident that we could produce the workforce. So I'm confident that the strategies that Sarah's implementing with the New Collar Network, the New Collar Innovation Center, are going to be the key catalyst to helping fuel the economy here in Santa Fe. And it's really exciting to see the innovation coming through this community.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I'm going to thank both of you and call up my apprentices to kind of tell their story briefly. That was so fun. You guys can, the mics are here. So, Alec is no longer an apprentice. The Department of Labor calls everyone who graduates a journeyman. So Alec is actually a journeyman. His real title in our manufacturing group is manager. What did we call you?
Project and customer experience manager.
That's right, because we're a small group, so he does a lot of stuff and covers a lot of territory. And Philip is a more recent apprentice. Has it been about 6 months?
Since November, yes.
Since November, and Alec, why don't you tell us what you were doing when you found us?
I was living in Washington State, had just moved out there during the pandemic, and was just piecing together quite a few different jobs, and then learning sort of all the CAD 3D printing skills on my own, and having a tough time doing all of that too. And then, funny enough, my mom saw the ad for the apprenticeship program here, and emailed it to me, and then said like, oh, you got to apply, and followed her advice and applied. Then talked with Sarah and moved back to Santa Fe within the span, I think it was like a couple weeks after that. So it all happened pretty quick.
Well, and it's funny because everybody's always talking about, the boomerang projects, and so you were definitely a boomerang that came back.
Yeah, totally. And that, it wasn't the first time either. Left Santa Fe, come back all the time. Yeah.
And Philip, you want to tell us a little bit about your story?
So initially, I was, before coming to the New Collar Network, I was a transportation coordinator for home-delivered meals for the Los Alamos Retired Senior Organization. And unfortunately, I started recognizing that there were, it was time to leave. And a friend of mine mentioned the New Collar Network apprenticeship, and what was neat is that they actually gave me the opportunity to study. I was actually starting to study late August, September, and actually just started studying independently in their lab, and finally talked to Sarah about my interest of the apprenticeship and also, my certain passion for education, and we share that together, and that's where I am now.
And the friend he described was an apprentice at the time, has finished the program and is a journeyman, and had been, I think, working at Domino's and was laid off and was unemployed. His unemployment was about to expire, and he finished the program and lives in Los Alamos, and we were looking at a way for him not to have to do the commute with gas prices, and so we rented space at the Makerspace. So now we have another location in Los Alamos, and he is located there and has now decided he would be an independent contractor with us, but also allow him to take entrepreneurial studies and start his own little business in Los Alamos with our support. Most of his business comes from us, but it's, we wanted to find a way for him to continue, and as John Rizzo was talking about, with the ability that we have with technology today, he does a lot of our online program monitoring and mentoring of our online students that we have around the country, and he can do that from Los Alamos, and so it's been really great. So, what did you like about the program?
The flexibility of it, and sort of, if I had a certain interest, I could totally chase it in that direction, and just see what's motivating and interesting. Yeah.
I have to agree with Alec on that. Is the nice thing about this apprenticeship program is, yes, it's project-based learning, but it's your projects that you're learning. So like for me, I'm really into dual color filament, and I have the total freedom in this apprenticeship to explore, I'm interested in different ways of manufacturing filament, while like our other apprentice that we used to have, he was more interested in the actual mechanics of the machine and how do you make it a better quality machine? How do you make it go faster? So it's kind of fun that we can focus on different parts of the 3D printing industry.
Yeah, even though we're still covering the whole curriculum, we can have an emphasis. And because it's project-based, and the projects are, I think, the hardest part of solving a problem is identifying the problem. And so, at least that's my experience in manufacturing and in life. And, it's always funny to me when people talk about assigning their students projects, because, what if the student doesn't really, they're not interested in whatever it is you assign to them. And so it is just so much more powerful when you're able in the badge to say, I'm going to identify what the problem is and then solve that problem. And we've had some really fun ones with the students. And so both of these guys teach for us and are the instructors for the pre-apprenticeship program with the Santa Fe Indian School. And I am so thankful that we've had this opportunity, thanks to Jennifer and Diana. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have to get up. I have my heels on. So I think most of you know that I work with MIT and the MIT Fab Labs, and I spoke for the Close-It Summit, which is what is now the Cactus Summit. I think that was in 2019, and for JMA. And I did a presentation with an amazing woman named Stephanie Couch. And Stephanie ran the Lemelson Foundation High School Invent program at MIT. And somehow in all my time on campus, if they're consulting for them, I had never met her, and met her in Santa Fe. And we want to kind of dig a little deeper into the lower grade levels and talk a little bit about the Invent program. And the students came. From? Oh, yay, yay. We'll come up. No. Oh, move our chairs. Hi. Every time they're at the HEC, I'm not there, so we've never met in person. Claire, would you talk about the Invent program and some of the amazing things that the high school students around the country have done, and then talk about what's happening at Tucumcari in northern New Mexico?
Yes, the Lemelson MIT program has a nationwide grants initiative called Invent Teams, and they have been running that, and we find it's a competition, basically. They apply with a problem, and they are granted funding and 1 year of support to take that idea and reduce it to practice into a prototype. And from our Invent Teams, we have actually had 13 patents come from groups of high school students. And so it's really powerful to see the Invent Team program shows what is possible when you actually give some money and some time to these students and see what they can create.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah.
So what are they doing in Tucumcari?
In Tucumcari, what we're beginning to do is think of it as trying to expand it into a 2-year program, where 1 year you could really explore the challenge space, like you said, that's one of the hardest parts. So in Tucumcari, they've spent this year exploring the challenge space, and what they've done is they've identified the problem of accidents in heavy machinery. And so they in interviews in their community, they have learned that they can often heavy machinery operators can often see a problem before it happens, but it is so loud and so chaotic, they can't stop it. And so you can see it about to happen, but there's no way to communicate. And so they're often in areas, they're in Tucumcari, they're not around Wi-Fi signals, and so they are going to use LoRa technology to create local networks, where you basically have a button on the steering wheel that would send a signal to everyone. And so it's a very low-cost solution that could be used anywhere. You don't need Wi-Fi networks, but you could, by being in proximity to each other, and it's basically bouncing off. So as long as you have spots for these LoRa connections, they can actually stop and communicate.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is.
And so one of the instructors, one of the teachers from the schools for the Invent program are the mentor and organize it, is that right?
Yes. Now, they have a very interesting high school. They have a 4-day school week, and they are actually using their 5th day. They spend all day Friday inventing. They're a small school, so they're also on the sports teams, the robotics team, but they're also the invention team. And in this school, a 15-student school is 10% of their total school population. And so it really is a community process.
It is always astonishing to me the amazing inventions that come out of rural communities and the really powerful impact it can have. And so these two lovely young ladies, so you are in the pre-apprenticeship program, and so what are your names?
I'm Kiana Povila.
My name's Kaylin Joe.
And what grade level are you?
We are both juniors in high school.
Oh, nice. That's great, because then you'll be with us next year, because the program will go through next year as well. And so what are you working on? We're starting with Introduction to Digital Design, which is basically an introduction to CAD design. And so you've had, what, 3 classes now? And so what are you doing, and what are you designing?
Well, our instructors are Alec and Philip, and they're really awesome. But our first project was a keychain project, and when I just joined the class, it was a very free, fun space, and I caught on to everything very quickly. It was easy, and it was they were like, do you need help? And I was like, oh, no, thank you, I got it. It's easy.
That's because you're a digital native. That's because you've grown up with this stuff. And what did your keychain look like? We have to start to back up. We have to start with some fundamental skills. And Stephanie and I bemoan all of the time so many of the programs we see where, kids come out of a 2-year program and they're making Christmas decorations, and we really want to do much more. And she says, your kids do so much, but we have to start somewhere. So what we start with, because we can print them very quickly, we start with something flat. So we start with a keychain. And so that's something we can do in the first week. So what did your keychain look like?
Mine was kind of basic, since it was the first start. It was just a basic rectangle, and I drew my name. Oh, nice. It was carved in, yeah.
Well, that's cool. So you've had now 3 classes, and I heard from the guys that Alyssa, your person from the Indian school who comes with you, asked at the end of the 3rd class if you all were interested in doing a summer class, and Alex said that everybody wants to come back. So what is it that you liked about the class? I mean, besides for you it was easy, but besides being easy.
I think it's because anything in that digital space, and you can make anything you've ever wanted possible. So lately I've been looking into building stuff, but with that space and with the program that we use, it's very easy to build stuff, and it's you could build anything. So if you think of just something in your mind, like you wanted an origami shaped like doghouse, you could easily build that, or you could easily build like things that you never needed or you always needed. If you're missing a piece, you could build that. And it's just a space. And I was like, I want to learn more about that space.
So you can take your ideas and you can hold them in your hand, and then they're real. And what about you?
What I like about it is that there's no restrictions. It gives you freedom to explore. And it's a new space to learn and explore.
And to be creative. Yeah, and try new things that you can hold in your hand.
One of the other things that Lemelson MIT program's working on is creating a capstone course for seniors in high school to go through, where it actually in 1 year takes you through the invention process. And so building on the skills like you learned in 3D printing in your junior year, you'd go into this class and you'd actually go through the design thinking process of how do you identify a challenge, look at it in its different dimensions, figure out what you want to create, and build a prototype from that. Very similar to what the Invent Team students do, but in the school day. Because it's not just superstars, it's everyday students that want to find relevant, engaging, hands-on work. And so it kind of builds on that. You have the excitement of 3D printing, and then you can take that to say, okay, how can I use these skills and solve a problem in my community?
And that's what we do once we learn the fundamental foundational skills. So our next year will be just that. And so we teach the Stanford, which we're going to use this afternoon in our roundtables. We teach the Stanford D-School model, which many of you know. And it's a great way to focus all of the learning into identifying a problem, relating to the end user for the prototype, and then iterating the design where you come out with something that pretty much meets your needs.
Yeah. And with Lemelson, we're trying to create a pathway from kindergarten through community college. And kind of striking to me was that NASA survey where they interviewed 4 and 5-year-olds, and 98% of them were creative geniuses. But 5 years later, 30% of them were. 5 years after that, 12% were. And by the time we're adults, it's 2%. And how do we strengthen that creativity all the way through, right? Provide alternatives in our educational system where it's not just rote learning, but how do we expand that creativity?
And as we've talked about all day, it's about the creativity and not losing that and having lifelong learning that actually keeps that creativity moving along. Isn't there a school in Albuquerque that was in the Lemelson program?
I think there was a Rio Rancho school, yes.
Rio Rancho.
On the table, we have a write-up of them. Yeah, there's been several New Mexico Invent Teams.
Of course, because we're in a creative state. So I also think it's interesting, Mr. Erickson, I think who's a science teacher at the Indian school, does a lot of work of solving problems that are in the communities. And he worked with us, people are still shocked when I say this, but many of the homes on the reservations do not have hot or cold running water, which I think is a sin in the 21st century. And so COVID comes along, and how do you follow CDC guidelines and wash your hands if you don't have water? And I read this horrific story in the New York Times about a Navajo family where it was an elderly mother and the boy, her son, drove an hour to a place where he could get water. And there were, of course, because we're telling people they have to wash their hands, there was a lot of people at the source of the water, and he ended up bringing COVID back, and the family died. And I read this and I thought, well, this is just wrong. I mean, we need to be able to wash our hands. And so we worked with Mr. Erickson and created a mobile hand washing station that we were doing these like really not very sophisticated copies of the mobile hand washing stations you could buy in a catalog that was $700, and I was trying to get it down to $50 because that's how much funding I had. And Mr. Erickson worked with us, and we ended up creating a hand washing station that was looked like a teepee because you could fold it up and then move it to the other homes so that now it could really serve more of the community. And we designed and 3D printed the holder for the soap, and it was a bucket system. And it was just such a wonderful project, but sadly, the school closed, and this was probably the beginning of 2020. But do you know much about the programs that he's doing with, I know he's doing one with the Arroyos. No?
I don't think so.
No. He was telling me recently about another program where they were taking science and going back to the community and working on environmental problems. But I think those are the kinds of real life problems that make a difference. And when I go to MIT Fab Lab meetings, I'm always discouraged because the Americans always have the worst projects. And it's the African countries, it's India, it's China, where people have such enormous need, and they are really forced. And what I see in the US is it's the rural communities, and it's the inner city that has the most interesting projects. And it's because they're forced to, these communities are forced to solve problems. And
our students. I really think students have a different perspective that we desperately need. And when we trust and arm them with funds and resources, they flourish. Yeah.
Students are amazing. What else do you think the pre-apprenticeship, and it doesn't mean that you have to become an apprentice, but how do you think it's kind of changed how you think about your next steps after high school? Because you're juniors.
I'm not one for college. Actually, I was gonna just, I guess, entrepreneur my way into life.
Good. That's a great phrase.
Yes. Because there's all these things that I see are wrong, but I don't know how to do them, and I want to figure them out. Because no one that is over 10 years older than me, you guys are making a big change, but no one have I seen in my communities have really wanted to make a change. So who's going to solve them if not me and the people of my age?
That's very cool.